Oh, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Reasonably Fine Art Talk for Tuesday, August 11th, 2020. It's warm up here in Vermont, ladies and gentlemen. It's very warm. You can always tell it's warm because the cats flatten out. They go from having about a depth of about 8 inches per cat to about 2.5 inches. They become much more rug-like. And you have to avoid squishing them as you walk around the house. But anyway, thanks for joining us for the Reasonably Fine Art Talk. Today, it's so much fun doing these because, you wake up in the middle of the night before, and it's like, oh my God, what do I have to talk about? And then assemble the slides in the morning, and it's like, oh, there's so much to go over. So let's just plow right into it, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just plow right into it. First slide, my dear Betty Sue is behind the scenes, pulling the levers, making us look good. Today's topic was experimentation, and these are the tools with which one experiments, or at least which I experiment. Really couldn't be simpler. On the left, Amsterdam acrylic gesso, white. On the right, Amsterdam acrylic gesso, black. The brush is one of those inexpensive chip brushes from the hardware store. And then the smaller brush is just a rosemary, I think it's a watercolor brush. It's like a Sabeline sort of thing. I don't really use it that much. In fact, the images I'm going to show you in this Reasonably Fine Art Talk, I don't think I use them at all. But I do use that brush in some of the experimenting that I do. Next slide, please. Now, so as you know what I'm known for, which is drippy, gloomy portraits of rotting American infrastructure. In between those, I do like to switch it out to freshen up the palette, as it were, by just playing with pure mark making. I am not attempting to depict anything. I am not attempting to convey information, literal information, with the brush strokes. So it's tremendously liberating. It would be like being a tennis player who every once in a while, after they finish playing a bunch of very precise tennis matches, just goes out and wails against the side of the barn with rocks, So this is a typical table of, this was messing around one afternoon this past week. I had a bunch of, these are just some old canvases of bad paintings that I had painted over long ago and were just sitting unused over in a corner of the studio. So we'll take a look at each of these pieces a little bit up close. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. So they're all like 11 by 14, 12, 18, about that size. This one was thinking about Andrew Wyeth, how very often in his work he will push the horizon line way, way, way up. If you think about Christina's world, the horizon line is way up there. There was a painting, I don't remember the name of it, but I saw up at Shelburne Museum in Shelburne, Vermont, a couple of years ago, and the sky, there was even less sky than in this high contrast drawing, high contrast painting. Now, some people say, oh, these are notans. That was a term I really wasn't familiar with. I think my love of just looking at how these marks go down comes from my training as a graphic designer. The Yale graphic design program, you spent a lot of time looking at the interplay of black and white. It was about that simple. It was about that elemental. So this was just mucking a whole bunch of black gesso on top of a white panel and seeing what we got. Next slide. This one, yes, that's the next slide. This one was actually done at the end of the day, had started to clean out the brush in water, and just said, what would a more gestural thing look like? Just, not as black. So this is just the partially washed out brush. Very, very gestural. I love the way it broke up the space. I love the dynamic, the energy in this and in most of these. You can kind of draw a parallel, or someone could say this was related to action painting. Best known exemplar of action painting being, of course, Jackson Pollock. So very, very gestural, not concerned with subject matter at all. Since if you're watching this, you're probably somewhat concerned with subject matter, as am I. I sometimes wonder if, when we really get into a painting, we let go, we stop thinking about the thing and think a lot more about the arrangements of the lights and darks and the shapes. And I sometimes think that those of us who cling to being representational paintings are doing so because we don't quite dare go all the way to abstraction. When you go completely abstract, it always feels to me like, well, then anything goes. It's like why I don't find superhero movies very interesting. If you can stop, Superman can stop the world turning on its axis and turn it backwards so that Lois Lane doesn't get killed by Lex Luthor. Well, then pretty much anything can happen. It's not very interesting. Okay, next slide, please, Betty Sue. This is a full strength black gesso. This just like 3 strokes. One, the vertical, the horizontal, and then that kind of diagonal. Very, very simple. Just how does that break up the space? So you've got the positive space of the whites, right? So there's the kind of Pac-Man shape on the upper left, the painting key shape in the middle, upper middle, the quadrilateral on the upper right, and then the what is that shaped like? I don't know, like a 1990s, the back of a 1989 Buick in the lower left, and then that little white shape on the lower right. Do they still tie into one another? Do they still feel connected? How about that brushiness of the black, especially on that horizontal? The top of the horizontal brush stroke has that nice kind of striation going on. I love that. But I love looking at something like this. How would you utilize those elements in a painting? How exciting is that? How could that be made more exciting? Next slide, please, Betty Sue. This is a larger piece. This is, I think, 12 by 18, which is using basically the same set of strokes, okay, as that previous one. The vertical, I don't come down and make contact. The brush doesn't make contact to the page until about the middle. I think that was the first stroke. I think it was all one continuous stroke, actually. First stroke was coming down, so the right hand side, you can see where the brush makes contact with the paper, with the canvas. Down to the bottom of the canvas, you pull back up, going to the upper, toward the left. Then that loops around like a bow, and then the horizontal gesture. So you got to have a brush that will hold enough paint to do a complex gesture without you having to dip in again. And you have to just get the confidence to move, to just do this. It doesn't matter if it comes out looking like hell, because you can always just paint over it. You can gesso over it. You can gesso over it with black, or you could gesso over it with white, and then you have a clean surface again. Next one. This one, I tried, okay, what happens if I paint around the borders with black and then make some gestures? What's that look like? And there's no upside down, right side up on any of these. certainly when I'm looking at them in the studio, I'm flipping them around all the time. But I just love all that history of the mark left by the inconsistency of the brush. You know, that it's not like a house painting brush that is going to hold all that paint. It is going to kind of get, the paint is going to get a little bit scrubbed at various times. But boy, I love how these things look. Next one, Betty Sue. So this was to me, the ugliest of them. And because I'm a very stupid person, and I'm not really thinking about doing these slideshows until the last possible minute, I forgot to take a picture of this painting by itself, just like the last four. But when you go back to that first slide of the paintings on the table, you can see it on the table. Anyway, to me, it felt very, very static. So I had absolutely no qualms about just messing with it. So what I had put down was the black paint on the white surface. And I kind of gone along the right-hand edge, then kind of mushed along the bottom, and then made the gesture up at the top, up on the upper left. And it just was boring looking. So then I took some white gesso, and I think I poured a puddle of white gesso on the canvas, and then took my not very clean brush that I kind of just, rinsed out slightly and moved the paint around, which is why the white gesso becomes sort of grayish. Next slide, Betty Sue. Which brings us to the fun part of looking at this painting in particular. I took a bunch of close-up photos that you'll see that'll be the next bunch of photos. But what I try to do when I'm looking at these experimental pieces up close is to divorce myself from the literal figuration and just see what they remind me of. You may have seen this social media post that was going around in July, that it looks like a beautiful photograph of a beach with a scudding dark sky, and then the sand in the foreground, and the surf, and the expanse of ocean. But it's actually just a rusted sill of an automobile. I love when you can use a pedestrian device and have it evoke something magnificent. That to me is one of the great thrills of painting. So next slide, Betty Sue. So this is a close-up of that piece that I just showed. And this is the white gesso manipulated in three different ways. The upper left is the white gesso that the brush has just gone through. So it has that very brushy application. You can see how it breaks up the black shape going across. The grayish shape in the upper left, the model, the textured grayish shape, that was just, that was the same as the gray at the bottom, but I laid paper towel on top of, and then pulled it off, and it left that mark. And then at the bottom is kind of it's somewhat more watery, white gesso with still some of the black gesso that was in the brush there. But to me, what remains the pure black shape going across kind of the middle of the horizontal, it really starts looking like a landmass, right? That's one way one could read it. If we flipped the painting vertical, it might read as something else. But if we flipped it upside down, it might still read as a landmass, but in a very different way. It's just kind of keeping your mind open to how you could read something that you did not overly consider. You know, one of the things I find very boring in painting is when everything is meticulously worked out. There's nothing that takes your breath away there, except for the best it can be is the best that a human being can be. And what happens, I think what happens in nature and what happens accidentally is much more interesting than what humans consciously create. Next one, Betty Sue. This is another detail of that same piece. There are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. This is, again, just the black was painted down, was what was down. Then when it was fully dry, just kind of messed this gray across it. Look how delicious those brush strokes across the black look. Next slide. Same thing. Actually, I think it's the same area. Nope, different area. It does look a little like a perspective map of Florida that has had a highway drawn through it, but again, the textures of wet gesso, putting a paper towel down on top of the wet gesso and then pulling it off, the brush stroke with the white gesso and the brush stroke on top of the black gesso brush stroke, just really dynamic shapes to play with. You know, the graphic power of this is really fun. Next one. Yes, and this is this the, yeah, this is the same as the first one, except upside down now. And you know, how does that read? What possibilities does that give us? Look how one could read the texture of that removed paper towel, i.e. the bottom third of this piece. It almost looks like kind of shimmering water against a cityscape or something. If you know the British painter John Virtue, it looks kind of like a less drippy John Virtue. John Virtue does drips beyond how I do drips. So let's see. Yes, I see, says Tim Oliver. I love Tim Oliver. Hi, Tim Oliver. You're one of my favorite human beings. Stay safe down in Texas, Tim Oliver. But let's see. He's having wine and cheese already. Tim Oliver, it's 104 in Texas. But who am I to judge? We're delighted you're here and thankful that you are. Now, Mahmoud, our friend in Egypt, who was recently profiled in Eric Rhodes' daily painter thing. Mahmoud is wondering, when did I start doing these abstract paintings? Only recently. Yeah, I started doing them when I really had, well, Betty Sue and I talked about this. Betty Sue is a performing singer-songwriter. And when I was a music manager, one of the sad truths was that when I would start working with a singer-songwriter, all they wanted to do was sit around, play guitar, and write songs. And as their careers got more and more successful, and there was more pressure on them to write songs that hopefully would be hits, or not, singer-songwriters don't have hits generally, but they have songs that some songs get traction. And the last thing that the people wanted to do after a little while was to sit around, play guitar, and write songs. Betty Sue and I talked about how to keep my practice fresh as I started having more commercial success. And my level of success is very analogous. We talked about this with the other Charlie Hunter. My level of success is very analogous to that of a mid-level singer-songwriter. You can make a decent living. You got to work all the time, but you can make a living doing what it is that you love. But how do you keep it fresh? How do you not just keep doing the same thing? So therefore, we came up with this idea of just playing, and I've done it before, but I hadn't been doing it as kind of rigorously as I am doing it now. So basically, Mustafa, I started doing this just mark making for the sake of mark making about probably, I think, last fall. And now I tend to do it when I reach the end of a series. I did those paintings for the Santa Fe gallery of the little churches and stores, and I was very happy with those, but those are very depictive. And now that those are done, I'm just messing with doing this, and it's giving me ideas for future pieces. Like, as I said, like this having that kind of shimmering water. It's like John Virtue meets Mark Shasha. Next slide, Betty Sue. Next slide. This is my hero. This is Mr. Franz Klein in his studio with a, God, how tall is that? Let's say Franz was 6 feet, so that's 9 foot, a 9 foot high painting. Now he used to be, when he started out, he was a depictive painter, but then I think he was teaching, and late one afternoon he went into a studio, and there were a bunch of the studio stools stacked, and the light was coming through the window, and he saw the shadow that those stacked stools had left, and he traced it out and painted in the black, and that became his kind of first painting in the style for which he is known. He then went to much more just gestural stuff, but look at the beautiful breaking up of space that Klein does. Just amazing. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. But before we do, look at the layout of that Klein painting. And next slide, please, Betty Sue. And that was my little in-joke to myself for this painting of mine called August Bridge. And it's 6 feet by 4 feet. So on the right, I had the Klein, the almost completely abstract Klein gestures. And then it becomes this representational, figurative bridge. Can you go back to the Klein again, Betty Sue? Yeah. So you see, coming from the upper right down to kind of upper middle left, that diagonal above Klein's head. Now go back to my painting. That's what I was playing with the angle of the bridge girders up there. I loved this painting, and it didn't sell and didn't sell and didn't sell, and then it finally sold. That's a pretty boring story, Charles. Next slide, please. Just wanted to show a couple of other artists who it feels to me are kind of playing with this same. It is figurative, and that's figurative used in the sense of recognizable objects, or not in the sense of being of the figure. So this is a Doug Fryer, an 18 by 18, where he, a lot of Fryer's work is stunningly, beautifully, he calls it the suggested landscape. But it really seems almost like a dreamy photograph. This one, he does a lot of like horses grazing, just the suggestion of horses. I think these are cows. Tim Oliver would probably know. Tim Oliver just did a great painting of a black cow in Texas in the summer. It's tough to be a black cow in Texas in the summer. They get their grazing done in the morning, then find whatever shade they can. But you see those little black squares in the upper, slightly left upper middle? I think those are cows, or they could be read as cows. I can read them as cows, or they can be. This can be an abstract painting. I love work that just sings right on that knife edge between realism and abstraction. Next slide, please. One of my favorite current Canadian painters is a guy named David Sharpe, who lives in Ontario. This is a little 9x12. He does a lot of paintings of Hewlett Marsh, which is right near where he lives. This, I believe, is more Western Canada, this particular painting. But again, you can say, oh yeah, it's late day sky with the hill, the far hill bathed in that golden light, and some pine trees in the foreground. Or you could say it is a abstract collection of quadrilaterals. It's magnificent, magnificent. Next one. This is my friend Shar Coulson. I met Shar at Door County Plein Air a couple of years ago. She's one of the very few artists who really push abstraction at these plein air events. Most of the painters at the plein air events really come from a lot of them are former graphic designers, a lot of them are former illustrators, so that it tends to be very depictive. Shar makes her pieces hover in that world between abstraction and realism, and they always feel very genuine to me. It's very easy to make stuff that feels totally fake when you're doing this halfway between daylight and a dream. But Shar, I believe her. I find her work very, very exciting. This is acrylic, charcoal. I think there's oil in it too. I don't really remember. It just says mixed media, acrylic and charcoal. But it seems to have collage elements. She's great. Anyway, so look her up as well. Next slide. This is a piece I did. It's a 12x12 called Western Highline. And I posted this. I did it this last winter and spring is when I was working on it. And it's on aluminum, painted directly on aluminum. My usual colors, the Van Dyke Brown and raw umber, and a lot of squeegee where I pulled the paint. The middle portion, the middle light portion is really, it was the same texture as the dark above it. It was the same value as the dark above it. But then I pulled with the squeegee and it left the ghost of the image against the aluminum. Then I added the yellow green. Don't tell Royal Talons, makers of Cobra, for whom I am a signature ambassador artist. But I think that's Holbein Duo is the green. Don't tell them that though. The sky, however, is all Cobra. That was done with a printmaker's brayer, just taking a little raw umber, titanium buff, and unbleached titanium, and rolling it out back and forth. But this has the gesture thing going on. I'm not overworking the painting. I posted this on my Instagram a couple of days ago, and I received an inquiry from someone who thought it was just peachy, and I said, if you like it, if you like these, I'm painting these because I love painting them. I want to paint them. And was not promised to a gallery. I wasn't even sure if it was done yet or not. And she said, I don't have a lot of money. And I said, well, message me and I'll tell you what we can do. And I was delighted to have it go to a forever home. So it's in my studio right now, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, its little coat of varnish is just drying, and it will get sent off in the next few days. So someone did ask, what Susan Hoffman asked, what becomes of these? Do I keep them as is? Do I paint over them? I keep them until I say I'm bored with that, and then I paint over them. That's not a very interesting answer, but that's the answer. And Carolyn asks if I'm listening to music while doing these. I am. If I'm listening to the news, you don't get into that wild. If you're listening to Terry Gross, you don't get carried into the realm of the zone. You know the zone. Yeah, so I do tend to listen to music, and I tend to listen to less. I'm a big fan of narrative singer-songwriter music, but that's not what I'm listening to when I'm doing something like this. My probably the record I would say is a go-to record. If you Google this song, Google Hotel Vast Horizon by Chris Whitley. That's that kind of fever dream poetry that he was so good at. And the raw evocativeness of his music. That's very useful to me when doing this kind of work. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Oh, this is I call this Japanese roller, which you could then build some whole narrative out about what a Japanese roller was. But really, I call it Japanese roller because I try to give these pieces just names so I can remember which one I'm talking about. And it just felt to me like that brush stroke was like a Japanese ink calligraphy. And then roller is because all those other marks were me cleaning a roller. This was one of those, one of the speedball printmaking brayer. But then, you know how it is. You'll work and work and work on a painting, and then take the painting away, and the working area where you were working is so much more interesting than the painting was. So this is a large mixed media piece by Hunter, probably about 3 feet, something like 3 feet by 3 feet. But it doesn't look like it looks like something. And I think it's kind of hilarious. So Diane O'Connor asks, now that I'm sellable as a realist painter, do I feel pressured to stick to what you're beginning to be known for? Yeah, to a degree I do. And I try to both honor that and not to get trapped by it. That's part of why I'm doing these purely abstract drawings. This spring, I did a series of pencil sketches every afternoon, sitting in my car, just of my town of Bellows Falls. And I posted them to the Growing Up in Bellows Falls Facebook group. And people started requesting that I come to their house and do a drawing of their house. Or that I sit in my car outside their house and do a drawing of their house. And that totally froze me up about doing those drawings. So that's why it's really fun to do these abstracts. They're not to do these gestures, to just keep it loose. So it would not be fun to be doing little paintings just like my saleable, my gallery paintings. Actually, let's go to the next slide, Betty Sue. This is a close-up of a painting, an experimental painting that I'm working on. You remember those paintings, if you've watched the talks before, the little paintings I just did for the gallery in Santa Fe, those 24 by 24s of the vernacular architecture of New Mexico. This is the same process, which is to project a photograph, do a detailed trace, put a coat of matte medium, acrylic matte medium down, and then just basically start to fill in between. But look at the shapes here. Very reminiscent of the gestures of the pieces that I've shown earlier today. I am certainly thinking about what I learned, how I felt looking at those gestures as I am working on this piece. This piece is a detail. Oh yes, so next slide, Betty Sue. This is typical of what I am thinking of when I'm now, go back again to the previous one, Betty Sue. Yeah, as I'm working on this. How do I keep that vitality as I am building this new painting? Now go ahead. And now go to the next one. And this is the painting that we just saw the detail of that is on the easel. And this is a family photograph from one of the Hunter family albums. And it is my older brother and myself collecting maple sap from a maple tree in our yard at our house in Milford, New Hampshire when I was a child. Now I'm going to just read. Okay, Corey says the experiments remind her of what Georgia O'Keeffe did when she began experimenting monochromatically with abstractions derived from nature. Yeah, I mean, all of us, we just have to climb into what interests us and play with it. So I'm working on this, which is I am taking knowledge that I collected while doing the commercial paintings of the vernacular architecture of New Mexico. I am marrying that knowledge to imagery from my life. This is a 30 by 30. I have a small show at a museum coming up next year, and I don't know if that's what the show is going to be, but I'm trying to take information that I've gathered from the vernacular paintings, from these gestural paintings, and putting it into this new series. So yeah, as I continue to develop a career, I am going to try to always be pushing what I am doing and not just always do the same thing. Some stuff will be more successful than other stuff, but if you don't, you just got to dare to step through that door. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, so that's why experimentation is a good thing. I would love if people enjoy this, post experimental pieces that you do in the comments section. You know, I love seeing what people do. This will also be up on YouTube later today. Do swing by my webpage. The one with all the information for kind of the working artist is www.hunter-studio.com. That has my supply list, all that stuff, plus these very cool t-shirts. Anyway, take good care, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Betty Sue, for working the magic behind the scenes, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.